When the frosted glass door swung open and Mason Brooks found himself staring at Victoria Sterling, half-dressed in her corner office, he knew his life was about to change. He just didn't know whether it meant getting fired or something far more dangerous. The tool bag slipped from his fingers and crashed against the marble floor, shattering the profound silence that existed only in spaces where powerful people made decisions that changed lives without ever seeing the faces of those affected. The fluorescent light in Mason's bathroom had been dying for 3 weeks, but he couldn't bring himself to fix it. Not because he didn't know how — he'd rewired half the building where he worked — but because every time he looked at that burnt-out bulb, he saw another bill he couldn't pay, another promise to his daughter Emma that he'd have to break. The light stuttered on at 4:47 in the morning, casting shadows across his face as he splashed cold water against his skin and stared at the stranger in the mirror. 24 years old, and he looked 40. The lines around his eyes told stories he wished he could forget, and the calluses on his hands were a roadmap of every job he'd worked to keep a roof over their heads. Behind him, through the thin walls of their cramped Boston apartment, he could hear Emma breathing softly in her sleep, that gentle rhythm that was the only music that mattered anymore. He'd been 18 when everything fell apart. One positive pregnancy test, one screaming match, one door slamming as Ashley walked out of his life before Emma even took her first breath. "I'm not ready to be a mother," she'd said, her voice cold and final. "You figure it out." And he had. Somehow, impossibly, he had. 6 years of night classes abandoned. Dreams of engineering school packed away in boxes he couldn't afford to store. Every ambition, every possibility, every version of himself that might have been, all of it sacrificed at the altar of diapers and daycare, formula and rent, keeping one small human alive and safe in a world that didn't care if you were drowning. The maintenance job at Sterling Enterprises paid enough to keep them afloat. Barely. Mason had started in the sub-basement 3 years ago, fixing pipes and unclogging drains, invisible to everyone who mattered. He'd worked his way up to general maintenance, which meant slightly better hours and the occasional glimpse of daylight, but it was still a job defined by other people's emergencies and his own exhaustion. Being a father wasn't his choice, but it was the best thing that ever happened to him. Mason pulled on his work shirt, navy blue with Sterling Enterprises maintenance embroidered over the pocket, and grabbed his tool belt from the hook by the door. In Emma's room, he knelt beside her narrow bed and brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead. She stirred but didn't wake, her small hand curling around the stuffed rabbit he'd found at a thrift store for her 5th birthday. Tomorrow she'd ask again why she didn't have new shoes like the other kids at school, and his heart would break a little more, knowing he'd failed her in yet another small way that would add up over time into something he couldn't fix with a multimeter and a wire stripper. A soft knock at the door announced Dorothy Mitchell, their 70-year-old neighbor who watched Emma most mornings in exchange for help with her leaking sink and broken cabinet hinges. It was a fragile arrangement held together with favors and goodwill, but it was all he had. Dorothy's weathered face creased into a smile as she slipped inside, moving with the practiced quiet of someone who understood what it meant to stretch every dollar until it screamed. Mason's phone buzzed at 5:03. His stomach dropped even before he looked at the screen. Early calls were never good news. "Brooks." The voice belonged to Frank Henderson, the day shift supervisor, and he sounded harried. "I need you to handle an emergency call. Executive floor. Electrical issue in the CEO's private office wing." Mason's hand tightened around the phone. The executive floor was 23 stories above his usual territory, a world of marble and mahogany that maintenance staff entered only when absolutely necessary. He'd been up there exactly twice in 3 years, both times to fix urgent problems while the executives were safely away at lunch or in meetings. The unspoken rule was simple: be invisible, be quick, and don't make eye contact. Can't Martinez take it? I'm not scheduled until 7, and I've got to drop. Martinez called in sick. Stevens is handling a flood in the parking garage. You're the only one with electrical clearance who's answering their phone. Frank's voice softened slightly. I know it's early, Mason. I know you've got the kid. But this came from the top. CEO herself requested immediate response. Victoria Sterling. Even her name carried weight that made the phone feel heavier in Mason's hand. Everyone at Sterling Enterprises knew the stories. 28 years old and already running a tech empire her father had built over 4 decades. She'd taken over 2 years ago when Charles Sterling suffered a stroke, and the business world had waited for her to fail. Instead, she'd streamlined operations, acquired 3 competitors, and doubled the company's value. The financial press called her a prodigy. The employees called her the Ice Queen, and not with affection. Mason had seen her exactly once, moving through the lobby like a force of nature, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his rent. She hadn't looked left or right, hadn't acknowledged the people who stepped aside to let her pass. Her face had been perfectly composed, beautiful in a way that seemed deliberately weaponized. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, mahogany hair pulled back in a style that suggested control over every detail. She terrified him from 50 feet away. The thought of being in the same room with her made his hands sweat. Fine, I'll be there in 40 minutes. 30, Frank corrected. The email said urgent, whatever that means when it comes from Victoria Sterling. Mason ended the call and stood motionless in his tiny kitchen, the dying light from the bathroom flickering overhead like a warning. He couldn't afford to lose this job, not with Emma's school fees coming due, not with the landlord already circling about last month's late rent payment. He'd go to the executive floor, fix whatever needed fixing, and disappear back into the basement where he belonged. Simple, safe, survivable. The bus ride to Sterling Tower took 25 minutes through streets still dark with pre-dawn shadows. Mason watched the city wake up through streaked windows, delivery trucks unloading, coffee shops flickering to life, other people stumbling toward their own obligations and compromises. He wondered how many of them felt like they were drowning too, just trying to keep their heads above water one more day. How many carried the weight of a small life depending entirely on their ability to show up, function, provide. Sterling Tower rose 63 stories into the Boston sky, all steel and glass, a monument to ambition that seemed to mock everyone who entered through the service entrance. Mason swiped his maintenance badge and took the freight elevator, watching the numbers climb with a sense of dread that tightened around his chest. Basement levels, ground floor. The numbers kept rising, carrying him away from familiar territory into a realm where people made millions while he scraped together enough for Emma's lunch money. The executive floor was quiet at 5:38, that kind of profound silence that only existed in spaces designed to intimidate. Mason's footsteps echoed on marble floors so polished he could see his reflection. A ghost in work boots, carrying a tool bag that seemed suddenly shabby against the backdrop of luxury. The work order said, CEO's private office wing, electrical malfunction, lights and switches unresponsive. He followed the corridor past conference rooms with walls made entirely of glass, past abstract art that probably cost more than he'd earn in 5 years, past doorways that led to worlds he'd never be invited to enter. The CEO's wing occupied the corner of the building, separated from the rest of the executive floor by a reception area that looked like something from an architecture magazine. The lights were indeed out, leaving the space dim except for the gray wash of dawn creeping through floor-to-ceiling windows. Mason found the electrical panel behind a mahogany door that blended seamlessly into the wall, labeled in small brass letters, "Authorized personnel only." He was authorized, technically, though he'd never felt less like he belonged anywhere. The panel revealed the problem immediately: a tripped breaker, probably from a power surge during the night. Simple fix, 5 minutes of work. Mason pulled his multimeter from the tool bag and verified the readings. 0 volts on the main circuit, exactly as expected. He reset the breaker and heard the satisfying hum of electricity flowing through the system. Lights flickered on throughout the wing, and he allowed himself a moment of relief. Then he heard it. A voice from somewhere deeper in the office suite, female and sharp with frustration. "Finally! What took so long?" Mason's stomach clenched. He'd assumed the floor would be empty this early, that he'd have the place to himself. The realization that Victoria Sterling was already here, already working while the rest of the city slept, made him want to disappear into the walls. "Just needed to reset the breaker, ma'am," he called back, keeping his voice professional and distant. "Everything should be working now. I'll just test the switches to make sure." "Do it quickly. I have a press conference in 2 hours and I need to change." Mason moved through the reception area, testing light switches as he went. Each one responded perfectly, flooding the space with warm light that made the artwork glow and the marble gleam. He was thorough but fast, wanting nothing more than to finish and escape back to the maintenance levels where executives existed only as distant voices on intercom systems. The executive suite had 3 main areas: the reception space, a large conference room, and what had to be Victoria's private office. 2 of the 3 doors were open. The third, made of frosted glass that turned everything behind it into soft shadows, was closed. Mason tested the switches outside the conference room, then moved toward the office. There was one more switch by the frosted door, a master control that probably operated the office lights. He flipped it, heard the click of response, and reached for the door handle without thinking. It was instinct, a maintenance worker's reflex after 3 years of checking, testing, verifying. His hand was on the frosted glass, pushing it open before his brain registered what he was doing. The door swung inward. Victoria Sterling stood in the center of her office, frozen in the act of pulling a fresh blouse from a garment bag. She wore a black skirt and nothing else above the waist, except a bra so delicate it seemed barely there. Her mahogany hair was down, falling in waves across bare shoulders, and her dark eyes went wide with shock that matched the horror flooding through Mason's veins. For one endless second, neither of them moved. The world compressed into that single moment, her skin pale against the dark fabric, the curve of her collarbone, the vulnerability of exposure in someone who'd built an empire on never showing weakness. Then reality crashed back in. The tool bag hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. "I'm sorry!" The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "I'm so sorry! I was just testing the lights! I didn't know! I didn't mean to!" "Get out!" Her voice was ice over steel, quiet and absolutely lethal. "I'm sorry," Mason said again, backing away so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. His face burned with humiliation, his heart hammering against his ribs. "The door, I thought it was empty. I was just checking the switches. I'm so sorry." "Turn around." The command stopped him mid-retreat. Mason spun so fast he felt dizzy, facing the frosted glass and the blurred shapes of the reception area beyond. Behind him, he heard the whisper of fabric, the sharp zip of the garment bag. Every muscle in his body was locked rigid, waiting for the explosion, the rage, the inevitable consequences of the worst mistake of his professional life. He'd walked in on Victoria Sterling half-dressed. The CEO. the woman who could end his career with a single phone call, the woman who held his entire, fragile existence in her perfectly manicured hands. "I swear I didn't see anything," he said to the frosted glass, his voice cracking. "I swear I was just doing my job, testing the circuits." "I didn't know you were in here. Please, I have a daughter. I need this job. Be quiet." Mason's jaw snapped shut. He could hear his own breathing, ragged and panicked, and beneath it, the soft sounds of Victoria dressing. Seconds stretched into eternities. His entire body felt like a live wire, crackling with fear and shame. When she finally spoke again, her voice was controlled, but carried something underneath that he couldn't quite identify. "What's your name?" "Mason Brooks, ma'am. Maintenance staff, electrical clearance." The words came out like a prisoner reciting his crimes. "I've worked here 3 years. I've never had a complaint. I swear this was an accident. I thought the office was empty. I heard you the first time." A pause that felt like falling. "You can turn around now." Mason turned slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. Victoria Sterling stood behind her desk, now fully dressed in a cream blouse and the same black skirt. Her hair was pulled back in the severe style he recognized from that glimpse in the lobby months ago. She looked every inch the CEO again, all traces of vulnerability erased. But her dark eyes studied him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Look at me." It was the hardest thing Mason had ever done. Meeting Victoria Sterling's gaze felt like staring into a searchlight. But he forced himself to do it. She deserved that much at least, an acknowledgement of what he'd done, an acceptance of whatever judgment she was about to deliver. Her face was unreadable, a mask of perfect control. But something flickered in her eyes as she looked at him. Not anger exactly, something more complicated. "You really didn't know I was here?" It wasn't a question, but Mason answered anyway. "No, ma'am. I swear. The work order just said electrical malfunction. I reset the breaker and I was testing all the switches. I thought the whole floor was empty this early." His hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists at his sides. "I understand if you need to fire me. I understand I don't have any excuse. I just want you to know it was an accident. I would never stop talking." He stopped. Victoria walked around her desk with measured steps, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that made the air between them feel charged with electricity. "You're terrified." It was an observation, not a question, delivered in a voice that seemed genuinely curious. "Yes, ma'am." "Of me? Or of losing your job?" "Both." The truth fell out before he could stop it. "Mostly of losing my job. I have a daughter. She's 6. I'm all she has. I can't." His voice cracked, and he forced himself to breathe. "I can't afford to lose this." Victoria's expression shifted, something almost like recognition passing across her face. She studied him for another long moment, and Mason felt like he was being catalogued, assessed, measured against some criteria he couldn't begin to understand. "The door was unlocked," she said finally. "I should have secured it. That's on me, not you." Mason blinked, certain he'd heard wrong. "Ma'am." "You were doing your job, testing the electrical system. I was careless." She turned away, moving back to her desk with that same controlled grace. "What you saw stays between us. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I wouldn't..." I would never say anything to anyone. I swear. Good. She picked up a tablet from her desk, her attention already shifting to whatever waited in her schedule. Finish your testing and get out. Send your supervisor a report that everything's functioning normally. Mason stood rooted to the spot, unable to process what was happening. She wasn't firing him. She wasn't even yelling at him. He'd braced for disaster and instead found something he didn't have a name for. Ma'am? The word came out before he could stop it. I really am sorry. Victoria looked up from her tablet, and for just a second, her mask slipped. What he saw underneath wasn't anger or ice or any of the things he'd expected. It was exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that recognized itself in another person. I know you are, she said quietly. Now go. Mason grabbed his tool bag and fled, his legs unsteady as he escaped from the office. He tested the remaining switches with shaking hands, documented everything on his phone, and made it to the elevator before his knees gave out. He leaned against the cool metal wall, his heart still racing, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd let him go. She'd seen his terror, heard his desperation about his daughter, and she'd chosen mercy over the punishment he deserved. Why? The question followed him all the way back to the basement, through the morning's remaining work orders, through the mechanical routine of fixing broken things while his mind spun in circles. 2 days passed. Mason reported for his shifts, kept his head down, and tried to convince himself the incident was behind him. The executive floor might as well have been on another planet. He fixed a leaking pipe in the 4th floor bathroom, replaced fluorescent tubes in the 2nd floor conference room, unclogged a drain in the cafeteria. Invisible work for invisible people. Then, on Thursday afternoon, his phone buzzed with a message from HR. Mason Brooks, please report to Human Resources immediately. 4th floor, Suite 400. His stomach dropped through the floor. This was it. They'd decided to fire him after all. Probably wanted to do it officially with paperwork and witnesses. He should have known the reprieve was temporary. The HR suite was all neutral colors and uncomfortable furniture designed to make difficult conversations slightly less awful. The receptionist barely looked up when Mason gave his name, just gestured toward a conference room where a woman in a gray pantsuit waited with a folder. Mr. Brooks, I'm Linda Patterson, HR Director. Please sit down. Mason sat, his hands gripping his knees. If this is about Monday morning, I can explain this isn't disciplinary, Mr. Brooks. Linda opened the folder and slid a document across the table. This is a position transfer. The words didn't make sense. Mason stared at the paper, trying to force his brain to process what he was seeing. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned from general maintenance to direct support technician for the executive floor. It's a permanent position with a significant salary increase and enhanced benefits package. Mason's vision blurred. The numbers on the page swam, 68,000 to 127,000, nearly double his current salary. Health insurance that covered dependents, which meant Emma's dental work, the braces she'd need next year. I don't understand. The position was created specifically based on a recommendation from Ms. Sterling herself. She indicated that the executive floor requires dedicated technical support with electrical expertise and, Linda consulted her notes, demonstrated discretion and reliability under pressure. Ms. Sterling recommended me? The words came out strangled. That's correct. The salary is detailed on page 2. You'll also receive health insurance that covers dependents, which I understand is relevant given your daughter. Linda's professional demeanor softened slightly. This is a good opportunity, Mr. Brooks. The executive floor position comes with better hours, better benefits, and direct exposure to company leadership. If you perform well, it could open doors. Doors. The word felt like a foreign language. Mason looked down at the numbers again. The salary was almost double what he currently made. The health insurance would cover Emma's dental work she needed, the checkups he'd been putting off because the co-pays added up too fast. The hours meant he could drop her off at school every morning and pick her up every afternoon, actually see her during daylight instead of kissing her goodbye while she slept and coming home after she'd already gone to bed. It was everything he needed, everything he'd been drowning for lack of, and it came from Victoria Sterling. "I don't understand why," he said quietly. "After what happened?" "Miss Sterling's recommendations don't require explanation," Linda interrupted smoothly. "Do you accept the position or not?" What choice did he have? What choice had he ever had? "Yes, I accept." But that evening, alone in his apartment after Emma had fallen asleep, Mason pulled out his phone and searched through his work emails until he found something he'd noticed weeks ago and promptly forgotten. A message from Frank, forwarded from Margaret Foster, Victoria's executive assistant, requesting maintenance records for all electrical work on floors 12 through 20. The timestamp was 2 weeks before the incident with the frosted door. He opened his personnel file on the company intranet, something he'd never bothered to check before. Last accessed by V. Sterling, the log showed. Date, 3 weeks ago. She'd been looking at his file before he ever walked into her office. Mason sat back, his mind racing. The incident hadn't been the catalyst. It had been something else. Something that happened before he ever saw her half-dressed and terrified. He thought back to those weeks, trying to remember anything unusual, any interaction with executives or situations that might have drawn attention. Then it hit him. The 15th floor, 2 weeks before the frosted door incident. He'd been troubleshooting a complex HVAC failure, teaching a junior technician named Martinez how to diagnose sensor feedback loops. It had taken 3 hours, and he'd explained every step, drawn diagrams, made sure the kid understood not just what to do, but why. They'd been deep in the mechanical room when Mason had looked up and seen a figure in the hallway. Just a shadow, really, someone watching through the half-open door. He'd assumed it was building management doing rounds and hadn't given it another thought. But what if it had been her? What if Victoria Sterling had been watching him work, listening to him teach, seeing something in that moment that made her pull his file and consider him for a position that didn't even exist yet? And then the incident happened, and instead of being the disaster that ended his career, it became a test he didn't know he was taking, a test of discretion under pressure, of character revealed in crisis. Mason pulled up the acceptance email from Linda and read through the job description again. Direct support technician for the executive floor, responsible for all electrical, HVAC, and general facility systems. Primary location, 23rd floor. Report directly to Frank Henderson, but with priority response to executive wing requests. You start Monday morning, Linda had said. Report to the executive reception desk at 7 a.m. Miss Sterling's assistant will brief you on protocols and expectations. 3 days. He had 3 days before he stepped into a world where Victoria Sterling would be a constant presence instead of a distant, terrifying legend. 3 days to figure out how to be invisible to someone who'd already seen right through him. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Mason stood outside Sterling Tower at 6:45, watching his reflection waver in the glass facade. The new badge felt heavy in his pocket, a small piece of plastic that somehow represented the distance between who he'd been last week and who he was supposed to become today. He dropped Emma at school early, endured her questions about why he looked so nervous, promised her they'd celebrate his new position with pizza Friday night. She'd hugged him extra tight before running to join her friends, and the warmth of that small body against his chest was the only thing keeping him from turning around and walking away. The executive floor at 7 in the morning was a different world than the silent space he'd encountered during the emergency call. Now it hummed with controlled energy, assistants arranging schedules, junior executives clutching coffee like lifelines, the soft ping of elevator arrivals delivering the day's first wave of ambition and anxiety. Mason felt immediately out of place, a maintenance worker in navy blue surrounded by tailored suits and clicking heels. The reception desk curved along one wall like a spaceship console, all blonde wood and embedded screens. The woman behind it looked up as he approached, her smile professional but not unkind. "Mason Brooks," he said, showing his new badge. "I'm supposed to report here for executive support services?" "Yes, we've been expecting you. I'm Rebecca. You'll be working primarily with me for coordination. Miss Sterling's executive assistant, Margaret Foster, will brief you on protocols in a moment. She's just finishing with the morning briefing." Rebecca gestured toward a seating area that looked like it belonged in an art gallery. Mason perched on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent, his tool bag resting between his boots. Around him, the executive floor continued its choreographed dance. People moved with purpose, their conversations happening in low tones that suggested everything discussed was confidential and crucial. "Mr. Brooks." Mason stood quickly, nearly knocking over his tool bag. The woman who'd spoken was in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in charcoal gray, with sharp eyes that assessed him in a single glance. "I'm Margaret Foster, Miss Sterling's executive assistant. Follow me, please." She moved like someone who'd learned to navigate these hallways in her sleep. Mason followed, acutely aware of how his work boots sounded against the marble compared to her nearly silent heels. They passed through the main executive area into a corridor he recognized from his emergency call, the path to Victoria's private wing. His pulse quickened despite himself. Margaret led him to a small office he hadn't noticed during his first visit, tucked discreetly near the electrical panel. It was modest by executive floor standards, but palatial compared to the basement break room where he usually left his things. A desk, comfortable chair, built-in cabinets for equipment, and a window that actually showed the city below. "This is your workspace. You'll maintain all systems on this floor with priority given to Ms. Sterling's immediate area. Response time for her requests is 10 minutes maximum. All other issues should be resolved within the hour, unless they require parts or outside contractors." She handed him a tablet. "This links to the building management system. You'll receive all work orders here along with Ms. Sterling's schedule, so you can plan maintenance around her meetings and commitments. That schedule is confidential. You don't discuss it with anyone, including other maintenance staff. Understood?" "Understood. Ms. Sterling values 3 things above all else: discretion, efficiency, and invisibility." Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact, delivering information he needed to survive. "Your work should be seamless. She shouldn't have to think about whether the lights work or the temperature is comfortable. If she notices you at all, it should be because you've solved a problem before it became her problem." The irony of being told to be invisible by the woman whose boss had personally promoted him wasn't lost on Mason. He kept his expression neutral and nodded. "Questions?" 1,000 of them. None he could actually voice. "No, ma'am." "Good. There's a staff briefing every morning at 6:45 in the main conference room. You're expected to attend. It covers the day's schedule and any VIP visits that might affect your work. Start your systems check at 7:30. Miss Sterling arrives between 8 and 8:30, and everything should be perfect before she walks through that door." Margaret paused, and something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Miss Sterling doesn't make recommendations lightly, Mr. Brooks. She saw something in you that made her believe you belong up here. I suggest you prove her right." Before Mason could respond, Margaret was gone, her departure as efficient as everything else about her. He stood alone in his new office, surrounded by the trappings of a life he'd never imagined, and wondered what exactly Victoria Sterling had seen. The first week passed in a blur of learning protocols and staying out of sight. Mason memorized the building management system, familiarized himself with every circuit breaker and HVAC control, discovered that the executive floor had more technology packed into a single level than the rest of the building combined. Smart glass that adjusted for light levels, climate controls that responded to occupancy sensors, conference room systems that cost more than luxury cars. And through it all, he caught only glimpses of her. A flash of mahogany hair as she strode past, her voice carrying through a conference room door, crisp with authority. Once he was replacing a malfunctioning light fixture in the hallway when she emerged from a meeting, and their eyes met for half a second before she looked away and continued walking. She gave no sign of recognition, no acknowledgement that he existed beyond his function as the person who kept her world running smoothly. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like standing in a room where all the air had been sucked out. Mason told himself it was better this way. Professional, clean, a clear boundary between the man who fixed things and the woman who commanded empires. He was here to do a job, collect a paycheck that was transforming his daughter's life, and maintain the discretion Victoria valued so highly. That moment in her office when he'd seen vulnerability crack through her armor was an aberration, a mistake they were both pretending had never happened. But late at night, lying awake in his apartment that suddenly felt less cramped thanks to the breathing room in his budget, Mason couldn't stop thinking about the question that had haunted him since he signed the transfer papers. Not why she'd promoted him. He'd pieced that together from the timeline and the file access logs. She'd been watching him work, evaluating his competence, considering him for this position before the incident ever happened. The frosted door had been a test of character, and somehow he'd passed. What he couldn't figure out was the exhaustion he'd seen in her eyes when she'd said those 4 words. I know you are. Like she'd recognized something in his desperation that resonated with her own hidden truths. Some kinship between a maintenance worker drowning in single parenthood and a CEO drowning in expectations she couldn't escape. The answer came on his 8th day, in a moment that redefined everything he thought he understood. It was late afternoon, almost 6, and the executive floor was emptying as people departed for dinner meetings or headed home to families and lives that existed beyond these walls. Mason was in the main conference room, testing a video system that had glitched during a presentation that morning. The technology was sophisticated enough that the manual read like a foreign language, but he'd spent 2 hours breaking down each component until he found the faulty HDMI processor. He was on his back under the conference table, rewiring connections, when he heard voices approaching. I don't care what the legal team says. Victoria's voice cut through the air like a blade. We're not settling. Stephen knew exactly what he was doing when he violated that non-compete. Victoria, the optics alone. A male voice, older, trying for reason. The optics of backing down are worse. We set a precedent here. Every executive we've ever signed walks away thinking they can steal our clients and we'll just negotiate a settlement. Heels clicked closer. Schedule the deposition. I want him on record lying about his intentions. They entered the conference room and Mason froze under the table. He could see expensive shoes, Victoria's black heels, a man's polished Oxfords. The door closed with a soft click. You're being unreasonably aggressive about this. The man's voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Stephen was your father's hire. Going after him publicly damages Charles's legacy. My father's legacy is secured by the company's success, not by protecting executives who betray us. Or are you suggesting I should prioritize sentiment over strategy, Robert? I'm suggesting you remember that some of us have been with this company since before you were born. Your father trusted Stephen. Perhaps you should consider whether your judgment. My judgment has increased this company's value by 42% in 2 years. My judgment acquired TechCore and Horizon when everyone said we were overextending. My judgment. She stopped abruptly. Is someone in here? Mason's heart stopped. He'd been so still, barely breathing, but somehow she'd sensed him. The maintenance technician, he heard Robert say, and Mason could hear the disdain dripping from every syllable. Perhaps you should have him escorted out before we continue discussing confidential matters. Silence stretched for 3 beats of Mason's racing heart. Brooks. Not a question, a statement. Victoria knew he was there. Mason slid out from under the table, tool bag in hand, his face burning with embarrassment. And something else. The sick realization that he'd just overheard a conversation he had no business hearing. I'm sorry. I was fixing the video system. I didn't mean to intrude on. Did you hear our conversation? Robert demanded. Mason recognized him now. Robert Caldwell, one of the senior board members, silver hair and expensive suit projecting authority that expected deference. I heard voices, Mason said carefully, meeting Victoria's eyes despite every instinct screaming at him to look away. I didn't listen. It was a distinction without a difference, and they all knew it. Robert's expression said he expected immediate dismissal, security called, possibly legal action. But Victoria just studied Mason with that same unreadable intensity he'd seen in her office 2 weeks ago. Finish your work, she said quietly. Then leave. Yes, ma'am. Mason turned back to the video system with shaking hands, hyper-aware of the conversation continuing in low tones behind him. He worked as quickly as possible, testing connections, verifying the repair. Every second felt like an eternity. When he finally packed up his tools and headed for the door, Robert was mid-sentence about shareholder concerns. Neither of them acknowledged Mason's departure. He made it to his small office and leaned against the closed door, his pulse hammering. The smart thing would be to go home, forget what he'd heard, and never mention it to anyone. Discretion. That's what Victoria valued. But the look in her eyes when she'd realized he was there, that hadn't been anger. It had been calculation, like she was testing him again, measuring him against some standard he didn't understand. Around 8 that evening, when the executive floor was dark and silent except for the glow of emergency lighting, his tablet pinged with a message. It was from Victoria's private email, sent directly to his work account. Your discretion is noted and appreciated. V.S. 7 words. No explanation, no context. But Mason stared at them until his eyes blurred, trying to decode the meaning underneath. She'd been testing him deliberately, or had she simply seized an opportunity when it presented itself? Either way, she'd watched him overhear a confidential conversation and choose silence, and she'd acknowledged it. The following week, Victoria requested him by name for the first time. The work order came through his tablet at 2:37 in the afternoon. Temperature control malfunction in CEO office. Immediate response required. Mason grabbed his equipment and made it to Victoria's wing in under 8 minutes. Margaret intercepted him at the entrance, her expression tight with concern. She's been in back-to-back video conferences for 3 hours. The AC cut out 40 minutes ago, and the room's getting uncomfortable. Fix it quickly and quietly. Victoria's office door was open, and he could hear her voice as he approached, still crisp and controlled despite what had to be stifling heat. I understand your concerns about the timeline, David. What I need you to understand is that the board won't approve additional delays. We launch in 6 weeks regardless of... Mason slipped into the office, keeping to the perimeter, making himself as invisible as possible. The temperature was indeed uncomfortable, at least 78 degrees and climbing. Victoria sat behind her massive desk, facing a wall of screens showing various video conference participants. She didn't acknowledge his presence, but he saw her shoulders relax fractionally. The thermostat was mounted behind a panel that matched the wall perfectly. Mason opened it silently and ran diagnostics on his tablet. The problem was immediately obvious. A failed sensor sending incorrect readings to the climate control system. He had a replacement in his bag, always carried extras of the most common failure points. We've been over this. Marketing doesn't drive the launch schedule. Product readiness does. If your team can't deliver the campaign materials by week 4, we'll find someone who can. Mason worked in absolute silence, replacing the sensor, recalibrating the system, testing the response. Cool air began flowing through the vents within minutes. He allowed himself a glance toward Victoria and found her watching him in the reflection of her darkened screens, her eyes tracking his movements even as she verbally dismantled someone's excuses. Much better. Now that we can all think clearly again, let's discuss realistic deliverables. It wasn't about the temperature. She was talking to him, acknowledging the fix without breaking her focus on the meeting. Mason felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of competence between two professionals who understood their roles. He packed up his tools and left as quietly as he'd entered. 10 minutes later, another message appeared on his tablet. Efficient work. Thank you. 3 days after that, she asked for him again. A malfunctioning outlet in her private conference room, discovered 15 minutes before a meeting with potential investors. Mason replaced the outlet in under 10 minutes, while Victoria reviewed presentation materials at the table, her presence a constant weight in his peripheral vision. Then again, a flickering light above her desk that she said was disrupting her focus during late-night work sessions. A coffee maker in her private kitchen that refused to function. A loose door handle that caught on her sleeve. Small things, easily fixed. But each request came directly from her, bypassing the normal work order system. And each one felt like another layer of something being built between them. Not friendship exactly, not trust, but something more complicated. Mason began to understand the real reason she'd promoted him. It wasn't just about discretion regarding what had happened in her office. It was about reliability. Victoria Sterling had built her entire life around control, and she needed someone in her immediate environment who could solve problems efficiently without requiring management or explanation. She needed someone who understood what she needed before she had to ask for it. He started anticipating issues, noticed when the temperature in her wing fluctuated, and adjusted it before she felt the change. Identified a pattern in the lighting system that caused a brief flicker every third day and replaced the timer module. Kept spare parts for every system she used regularly, stored in his office for immediate access. And slowly, incrementally, the Ice Queen began to thaw in his presence. It started with simple acknowledgments, a nod when he arrived to fix something, a quiet thank you when he left, then actual words beyond professional courtesy. "You're here early." Mason looked up from the smoke detector he was replacing to find Victoria standing in her office doorway, a tablet in one hand and coffee in the other. It was 7:15 in the morning, 30 minutes before her first scheduled meeting. "Wanted to finish before your first meeting, ma'am. Margaret mentioned you have investors at 8:30. "You read the briefings." It wasn't a question, but he heard approval underneath. "Helps me plan my work around your schedule." Victoria had been reviewing something on her tablet, but she looked up at that, studying him with those dark eyes that still made his pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "Most people on my staff do the minimum required and nothing more. Why don't you?" The question caught him off guard. Mason secured the new smoke detector before answering, giving himself time to choose his words carefully. I have a daughter. She deserves better than minimum effort. This job, what you did for me giving me this position, it changed our lives. Seemed like the least I could do was earn it. Something flickered across Victoria's face, too quick to identify. Your daughter, she's 6. Yes, ma'am, Emma. The name felt intimate somehow, personal in a way that made him hesitate, but Victoria was watching him expectantly. She's in 1st grade, loves art, hates math homework, wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. Just the 2 of you? Just us. Her mother left before she was born. It's been me and Emma against the world ever since. Victoria was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable. That must be difficult. It's everything. Then, because she'd opened the door, what about you? Is there... He stopped, realizing too late he was crossing a line. But Victoria smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips that transformed her face for just a second. No one. Building an empire doesn't leave much time for personal entanglements. Most people want something from me. Power, connections, proximity to success. It becomes difficult to know what's real. The honesty in her voice startled him. This was vulnerability, genuine and offered freely, and Mason didn't know what to do with it. I can't imagine what that's like, not trusting people's intentions. Can't you? Victoria's eyes held his. You trusted your daughter's mother. She left. Now you raise Emma alone, working yourself to exhaustion to provide for her. I'd imagine trust is complicated for you too. She was right. The recognition settled between them, an understanding that neither of them had expected to find here in her office at 7:15 in the morning while he stood on a ladder replacing a smoke detector. I should finish this. His voice came out rougher than intended. Yes. But she didn't leave. She stayed there working on her tablet while he completed the installation, and her presence felt less like surveillance and more like companionship. When he climbed down and packed his tools, she looked up one more time. Thank you, Mason. It was the first time she'd used his first name. The sound of it in her voice rewired something in his brain, created a connection he wasn't sure he wanted, and definitely didn't know how to handle. Any time, Miss Sterling. He left before he could say something stupid, but he felt her watching him all the way to the door. The day everything changed started ordinarily enough. Mason arrived at 6:30 for the morning briefing, coffee in hand, prepared for another day of invisible efficiency. Margaret ran through the schedule with her usual precision. Video conferences, department reviews, a site visit from a tech journalist, and an all-hands presentation at 4 in the main auditorium. The presentation is particularly important. Mrs. Sterling will announce the new product line. There will be press, investors, and all senior staff. Everything needs to be perfect. Mason made notes on his tablet. The auditorium was technically outside his jurisdiction, but he coordinated with the facilities team to ensure all executive floor systems would be stable during the event. Victoria would be under intense scrutiny, and the last thing she needed was a technical failure making her look unprepared. The morning proceeded smoothly. He handled routine maintenance, responded to a minor printer malfunction in the finance director's office, replaced a burned-out LED in one of the conference rooms. Around 2, he decided to check the auditorium personally, just to verify everything the facilities team had reported. The main auditorium seated 300 people and featured a stage with professional lighting, video screens, and sound systems sophisticated enough for concert venues. The facilities team had done good work. Everything looked pristine, the technology tested and ready. Mason was about to leave when something made him look up at the lighting rig. Years of maintenance work had trained his eyes to spot things that weren't quite right, subtle misalignments that suggested potential problems. One of the stage lights looked off-center, its mounting bracket slightly twisted. He found a ladder and climbed up to inspect it. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The safety cable, the backup that prevented lights from falling if the main mount failed, was frayed nearly through. Not from age or wear, but from what looked like deliberate cutting. Someone had sawed through most of the cable, leaving just enough intact that it wouldn't be immediately obvious, but would fail under the right stress. And the main mounting bolt was loose, turned back several threads, held in place by friction alone. Mason's hand shook as he examined the setup. This wasn't accident or neglect. This was sabotage. The light weighed at least 40 pounds. If it fell during the presentation, directly onto the stage where Victoria would be standing. He didn't let himself finish the thought. Working quickly, he secured the mounting bolt properly, tested the weight distribution, and replaced the safety cable entirely. Then he checked every other light in the rig, found 2 more with loosened bolts, secured them all. By the time he finished, he'd been in the auditorium for 90 minutes, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. The question burning in his mind was whether to report this. Tell Margaret, security, someone. If this was deliberate sabotage, there were protocols, investigations, potential danger to Victoria that extended beyond a rigged light fixture. But he had no proof beyond his professional judgment. The frayed cable could theoretically be explained as wear. The loose bolts might be attributed to poor maintenance, and if he was wrong, if he raised alarms that led nowhere, he'd look paranoid or attention-seeking. Worse, he'd put himself directly in Victoria's line of sight in a way that violated everything she valued about him. She needed him to be invisible, to solve problems quietly, not to create drama. Mason made his decision. He documented everything with photos on his tablet, secured the systems, and made a note to check them again before the presentation. Then he went back to the executive floor and tried to act like his heart wasn't racing. At 3:30, Margaret sent a message asking him to verify the video feeds in the auditorium one final time. Mason went back down, checked the lights again, still secure, and confirmed all systems were operational. People were already filling the seats. Press photographers set up cameras. The energy in the room built like a gathering storm. Victoria arrived at 3:55, flanked by Margaret and 2 senior executives. She wore a deep blue suit that commanded attention, her hair pulled back severely, her expression calm and confident. Mason watched from the shadows at the back of the auditorium as she took the stage, tested the microphone, and surveyed the crowd with the control of someone who owned every room she entered. Their eyes met across the distance. Victoria's gaze held his for just a moment, something passing between them that might have been acknowledgement or might have been his imagination. Then she turned her attention to her notes, and Mason forced himself to breathe. The presentation began. Victoria spoke with the kind of authority that made people lean forward, her voice carrying perfectly through the sound system. She outlined the new product line with precision, fielded questions from journalists with sharp intelligence, commanded the stage like she'd been born to it. Mason stood near the lighting controls, watching not the presentation, but the equipment. The stage lights held steady. The video screens displayed perfectly. Everything was working exactly as it should. He started to relax. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the damage he'd found was just neglect after all, coincidence and poor maintenance rather than malicious intent. Then the light directly above center stage shifted. It was subtle, a slight rotation on its mount, but Mason saw it immediately. His blood turned to ice. Someone was in the lighting catwalk above the stage. He could see movement in the shadows, a figure adjusting something he couldn't quite make out. Mason moved before thinking, racing toward the stage access stairs. He had to get up there, had to stop whatever was happening. But the stairs were on the opposite side of the auditorium, and Victoria was directly under that light, still speaking, unaware of the danger gathering above her. The light shifted again, rotated further. The sabotaged mount he'd fixed was holding, but now someone was actively working to override the safety measures. Mason abandoned stealth and ran, his boots pounding against the auditorium floor, drawing attention from the crowd. He saw security guards starting to move, confused by the commotion, saw Margaret's startled face, saw Victoria pause mid-sentence, her eyes finding him in the crowd. "Get away from center stage!" Mason shouted, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Now!" Victoria froze. Years of control kept her rooted to the spot, confusion and authority warring on her face. The light above her groaned, metal straining against compromised connections. Mason didn't have time to explain. He launched himself onto the stage, grabbed Victoria around the waist, and threw both of them sideways with every ounce of strength he possessed. They hit the stage floor hard, Mason twisting to take the impact on his shoulder. Half a second later, 40 pounds of metal and glass crashed into the exact spot where Victoria had been standing, the mounting bracket finally giving way. The light exploded on impact, with a sound like a gunshot. Shattered glass sprayed across the stage. Sparks flew from severed electrical connections. The crowd erupted in chaos, screaming, people running, security converging from all directions. But Mason only registered Victoria in his arms, her body pressed against his, her heart hammering so hard he could feel it through their clothes. Her dark eyes were wide with shock, her perfect composure shattered, and she was shaking. "Are you hurt?" Mason demanded, his hands moving over her shoulders, her arms, checking for injuries. "Did the glass hit you?" "I'm fine." Victoria's voice trembled despite the words. "You? How did you know?" "I'll explain later. Right now, we need to—" Security surrounded them, pulling them apart, voices shouting questions and orders. Mason caught a glimpse of figures fleeing from the catwalk access, saw guards racing after them. Margaret was there suddenly, her professional mask cracked with genuine terror, helping Victoria to her feet. "I'm fine," Victoria said again, louder now, authority returning to her voice even as her hands shook. "Everyone calm down. Clear the auditorium in an orderly fashion. Margaret, get security to—" "On it." Margaret was already coordinating on her phone. Victoria's eyes found Mason again. He was still on the stage floor, his shoulders screaming where he'd absorbed their combined impact, glass scattered around him like diamonds. Blood ran from a cut on his arm where a shard had caught him. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She moved toward him, but Margaret intercepted her gently. "We need to get you to a secure location until security sweeps the building. Please, Victoria." For a moment, Mason thought Victoria would refuse, but she let Margaret guide her toward the exit, looking back at him one last time with an expression he couldn't read. Shock, gratitude, something deeper that made his breath catch. Then she was gone, and Mason was surrounded by security personnel asking questions he barely heard, his mind replaying those seconds on a loop. The weight of Victoria in his arms, the terror in her eyes, the absolute certainty that if he'd been 1 second slower, she would have died. And somewhere in the chaos, Mason realized that invisible was no longer an option. He'd thrown himself into the spotlight to save her, and nothing between them would ever be the same. The security office on the second floor became command central within minutes of the auditorium evacuation. Mason sat in a hard plastic chair while a paramedic cleaned the gash on his forearm, the sting of antiseptic barely registering against the adrenaline still flooding his system. Around him, guards spoke in clipped tones into radios, coordinating a building-wide lockdown while reviewing security footage on a wall of monitors. "You're lucky. Another inch and this would have needed stitches." Mason didn't feel lucky. He felt like his entire body was vibrating at a frequency just below visible, his mind replaying those seconds on the stage over and over. The groan of metal, Victoria's body against his, the explosion of glass where she'd been standing. "Mr. Brooks," the head of security, Daniel Hayes, a former police detective with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many crimes to be shocked by much, pulled up a chair, his expression grave. "Walk me through what happened. Start with why you were checking the auditorium in the first place." Mason explained about the morning briefing, his decision to personally verify the systems, finding the frayed safety cable and loose mounting bolts. He showed Daniel the photos on his tablet, time-stamped from hours before the presentation. "You fixed it, secured everything properly. So how did the light still fall?" "Someone was up in the catwalk during the presentation. I saw movement, saw them working on something. They must have loosened it again or found another way to compromise the mount." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Did you see a face? Any identifying features?" "No, just a silhouette. Dark clothes, moving fast." "And you didn't report the initial sabotage?" The question carried weight, not quite accusation, but close. "I considered it, but I had no proof it was deliberate. Could have been negligence, poor maintenance. I documented everything, fixed the immediate danger, and planned to monitor it. I didn't expect someone to actively interfere during the event itself." Daniel studied him for a long moment. "Your quick thinking saved Ms. Sterling's life. I want to be clear about that. But this situation is now a criminal investigation, attempted murder, possibly corporate espionage. You'll need to make a formal statement." "Whatever you need." The door opened and Margaret appeared, her usual composure restored but strain visible around her eyes. "Mr. Brooks, Miss Sterling wants to see you now." Daniel nodded. "We'll continue this shortly. Don't leave the building." Mason followed Margaret through corridors now patrolled by additional security, past employees gathered in worried clusters, to the executive floor. The atmosphere up here was tense, assistants speaking in hushed voices, senior executives behind closed doors. Margaret led him not to Victoria's office, but to a smaller conference room he'd never entered before. Victoria stood at the window, her back to the door, still in the blue suit but with her hair down now, falling in waves across her shoulders. She didn't turn when they entered. "Leave us." Margaret hesitated. "Victoria, security protocols suggest I'm safe with Mason." Victoria's voice was soft but absolute. "Leave us, Margaret." The door closed with a click that seemed too loud in the silence. Mason stood just inside the room, unsure whether to speak or wait, his heart hammering against his ribs. The cut on his arm throbbed in time with his pulse. "You tackled me," Victoria said finally, still facing the window. "In front of 300 people. You grabbed me and threw us both to the ground." "I'm sorry. I didn't have time to." "Don't apologize." She turned, and the expression on her face stopped his words. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her carefully maintained mask completely gone. This wasn't the Ice Queen, wasn't the CEO who commanded boardrooms and dismantled competitors. This was a woman confronting her own mortality, stripped of every defense. "You saved my life. Do you understand that? If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't seen that light shifting, I would be dead right now." The rawness in her voice hit him like a physical blow. I saw the sabotage this afternoon. The frayed cable, the loose bolts. I fixed it, but I should have reported it immediately. Should have insisted they cancel the presentation until... You did exactly what you should have done. Victoria crossed the room, stopping 3 feet from him, close enough that he could see she was still trembling. You identified a threat, neutralized it, and stayed vigilant. When the danger evolved, you acted without hesitation. That's not something to apologize for. I'm just a maintenance tech. I fix broken things. I'm not, you're the man who saved my life. Victoria's eyes held his with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Don't tell me what you are or aren't, Mason Brooks. I know exactly what you are. The way she said his name rewired something fundamental in his chest. Mason found himself taking a step closer, drawn by gravity he didn't understand. What happened up there, on the stage? That wasn't about maintaining your image or protecting the company. That was about you. Just you. And I would do it again without thinking twice. Victoria's breath caught. For a moment, Mason thought she might say something that would change everything between them. But then her phone buzzed, shattering the moment, and she looked away. Security found evidence in the catwalk. Tools, cut cables. They're reviewing all footage from the building. Whoever did this will be caught. Her voice was steadier now, rebuilding her composure piece by piece. Do you know why someone would target you like this? A bitter smile crossed Victoria's face. I'm a young woman running a multi-billion-dollar company in an industry dominated by men who think they deserve what I have. I've made enemies, acquiring competitors, refusing partnerships, choosing merit over politics. The list of people who'd benefit from my death is longer than I'd like to admit. The casual way she said it, people who'd benefit from my death, made Mason's hands curl into fists. That's not normal. That's not acceptable. It's reality, and now I have to decide how to handle it. Cancel the product launch? Increase security? Show weakness to everyone watching for me to fail. You show strength by staying alive. Everything else is secondary. Victoria looked at him with something that might have been wonder. You really believe that? I know what it's like to have someone depending on you. To know that your choices, your survival, determines their entire world. Mason thought of Emma, probably finishing her homework right now at Dorothy's apartment, unaware of how close she'd come to losing him today. You have thousands of employees whose livelihoods depend on this company. You owe it to them to protect yourself. Is that the only reason? The employees? The question hung between them, heavy with implications Mason wasn't ready to examine. Before he could answer, the door opened and Daniel appeared with 2 other security personnel. Miss Sterling, we have a situation. We've identified the individual in the catwalk. Victoria's spine straightened, authority flooding back into her posture. Show me. They moved to a larger conference room where security had set up a command center. On the main screen, frozen footage showed a man in dark maintenance coveralls accessing the catwalk 20 minutes before the presentation. The image quality was good enough to see his face clearly. Mid-40s, sharp features, the kind of face that blended into corporate environments without raising questions. His name is Michael Grant, Daniel announced, pulling up additional files. He's been with building maintenance for 8 months. Background check was clean, references verified. We just discovered his employment application used a false social security number. Someone planted him. Victoria's voice was tight, controlled fury barely contained beneath the surface. That's our assessment. We're searching his locker and contacting authorities now, but there's more. Daniel pulled up another image, a screenshot of an email from an anonymous account. This was sent to 3 business journalists 40 minutes ago, before the incident. It claims you've been cooking the books, inflating revenue numbers to boost stock prices. The timing suggests whoever sent it expected you to be in no position to defend yourself. Mason felt sick. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was coordinated destruction. Kill Victoria, release damaging accusations, tank the company's value all at once. Someone had planned this with precision that spoke to resources and inside knowledge. The allegations are false, Victoria stated flatly. Our books are audited quarterly by independent firms, but proving that will take time, and the accusation alone will damage investor confidence. Not if you're standing in front of cameras tomorrow, very much alive, with security footage showing an attempted murder that coincides with fraudulent allegations, Daniel countered. That's not whistleblowing. That's conspiracy. We need to find Grant before he disappears, and I want to know who hired him. Someone with resources, someone who understands this company well enough to coordinate this kind of attack. We're on it. In the meantime, I'm assigning personal security. You don't go anywhere without— No! Victoria's voice cut like steel. I'm not hiding behind bodyguards like I'm afraid. We handle this intelligently, but I won't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me cower. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, but knew better. At minimum, you need someone watching your immediate environment, someone you trust. Victoria's eyes found Mason across the room. Something passed between them, a silent conversation that excluded everyone else. Mason stays close. He's already proven he can identify threats I can't see. He works on the executive floor anyway. Nothing changes visibly, but he's there. Ms. Sterling, with respect, Mr. Brooks is maintenance staff, not security personnel, Daniel pointed out carefully. Mr. Brooks saved my life while your security personnel were watching cameras and patrolling hallways. I trust his instincts. He stays. Daniel nodded reluctantly. We'll need to brief him on protocols, provide communication equipment. Fine. Do it now. I want this handled tonight. Victoria turned to Mason, her expression unreadable. Unless you have objections to expanding your responsibilities? Mason thought about what he was being asked, thought about Emma, about the risk of putting himself between Victoria and whoever wanted her dead. Thought about walking away, choosing safety, protecting the fragile stability they'd finally achieved. But when he looked at Victoria, really looked at her, he saw the vulnerability she was hiding behind steel and authority. Saw someone who'd built walls so high she couldn't see over them anymore, who trusted so few people that asking him to stay close was an act of profound faith. No objections. Whatever you need. The relief that flashed across Victoria's face was so brief he almost missed it. But it had been there, real and raw, before she locked it away again. The next 3 hours were a blur of security briefings, equipment distribution, and coordination with law enforcement. Mason was fitted with a discreet earpiece that connected him to the security network, shown emergency protocols, given access codes for systems he'd never imagined needing. Daniel ran him through threat assessment basics, what to watch for, how to respond. Your job isn't to engage threats. It's to get Ms. Sterling to safety and alert us. You see something suspicious, you call it in. Understand? Understood. Though privately, Mason wondered what he'd actually do if someone threatened Victoria in his presence. The tackle on stage had been pure instinct, and he suspected his instincts wouldn't wait for security protocols. It was nearly 11 when he finally made it home. Dorothy had put Emma to bed hours ago, leaving a note about the math homework Emma had struggled with and the chicken soup she'd left in the fridge. Mason stood in his daughter's doorway, watching her sleep, and felt the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. He'd crossed so many lines today, professional boundaries, class divisions, the careful distance he'd maintained between himself and the world Victoria inhabited. And tomorrow he'd cross more, standing close to her not as invisible maintenance staff, but as something else entirely. His phone buzzed. A message from Victoria's private number sent to his personal cell. "Thank you for today, for everything. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be complicated." Mason stared at those words until his eyes blurred. She had his personal number, had reached out after hours, had thanked him like a person rather than an employee. The intimacy of it terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. He typed back carefully, "You're welcome. See you at 7. Her response came immediately. 6:30. We have work to do before the day starts." Mason smiled, despite everything. Of course she did. The next morning arrived with news that Michael Grant had been apprehended trying to board a flight to Mexico. His apartment had yielded a burner phone with messages coordinating the attack, along with $50,000 in cash. He was in custody, not talking, but law enforcement was confident they could trace the money. Mason arrived at the executive floor at 6:15 to find it already buzzing with activity. Margaret intercepted him immediately, her expression complex, mixing professional courtesy with something that might have been concern. "Miss Sterling is in her office. She asked for you directly." Margaret's tone carried a warning Mason couldn't quite decode. "Whatever's happening between you two, be careful. She's under enormous pressure right now, and she makes decisions based on control and strategy. Don't mistake proximity for something it isn't." The warning was clear and probably wise. Mason nodded his understanding and knocked on Victoria's office door. "Come in." She sat behind her desk, already dressed for battle in a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back severely. But her eyes were softer when she looked at him, carrying memories of yesterday's vulnerability. "How's your arm?" "Fine, barely feel it." Mason closed the door behind him. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I spent the night reviewing everyone who might have orchestrated this. Business rivals, disgruntled former employees, board members who opposed my leadership. The list is extensive and depressing. Daniel will find the connection. The money trail always leads somewhere." "That's not what worries me." Victoria leaned back, studying him with an intensity that made the air feel charged. "What worries me is that I've built my entire life around not needing anyone. Control, independence, self-reliance. And yesterday I needed you. Absolutely, completely needed you to save my life. That's not a position I'm comfortable occupying." The honesty stunned him. Mason chose his next words carefully. "Needing someone in a crisis doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." "I'm not sure I'm allowed to be human. Not in this position." Weakness is blood in the water. Every competitor, every skeptical board member, every journalist looking for a story, they're all waiting for me to prove I don't belong here. So prove them wrong. Show up today stronger than yesterday. Face the cameras, address the allegations, demonstrate that whoever tried to kill you failed spectacularly. That's not weakness. That's power. Victoria's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You make it sound simple." "I didn't say it was simple. I said it was necessary." Mason leaned forward, holding her gaze. "You asked me yesterday what you are to me. You want the truth? You're the person who changed my daughter's life by giving me a chance I didn't deserve. You're the woman who works 18-hour days to protect thousands of employees she'll never meet. And you're someone who shouldn't have to face death threats and character assassination alone. The silence that followed felt alive, charged with everything they weren't saying. Victoria's eyes searched his face like she was looking for proof he meant it, that this wasn't performance or manipulation. I don't know how to do this. How to let someone be close without wondering what they want from me. I don't want anything except for you to be safe. That's it. That's all of it. That might be the most valuable thing anyone's ever offered me. Victoria visibly gathered herself, straightening in her chair. Today's agenda is brutal. Press conference at 9, addressing yesterday's incident and the false allegations. Board meeting at 11, where I'll need to reassure everyone the company is stable. Investor calls this afternoon. I need you close for all of it. I'll be there. The press conference was held in the main lobby, cameras and journalists packed into every available space. Mason stood off to the side, watching Victoria command the room with absolute authority. She addressed the assassination attempt directly, framed it as corporate sabotage coordinated with false financial allegations, and presented security footage that made the conspiracy impossible to deny. Someone wanted to destroy this company by destroying me. They failed. Sterling Enterprises stands stronger today than yesterday, and we will not be intimidated by criminals and cowards. The journalists erupted with questions. Victoria fielded them with sharp intelligence, never defensive, always in control. And twice during the conference, her eyes found Mason in the crowd, drawing strength from his presence. When it ended, Margaret intercepted them before they could return to the executive floor. The board wants to meet immediately. Robert Caldwell is insisting on a vote of confidence. Victoria's expression hardened. Of course he is. Let's not keep them waiting. The boardroom was on the 62nd floor, all glass walls and panoramic city views designed to remind everyone inside that they operated at the pinnacle of power. 12 board members sat around a massive table, their expressions ranging from supportive to hostile. Robert Caldwell occupied the chair directly opposite the head of the table where Victoria would sit, his silver hair and expensive suit projecting authority, his eyes gleaming with something that looked like satisfaction. Victoria, glad you could join us. We've been discussing yesterday's unfortunate incident. Unfortunate is an interesting word for attempted murder, Robert. Victoria took her seat. Mason positioned himself near the door, unobtrusive but present. Quite right. Which is why we need to discuss your security protocols, your decision-making process, and whether the company's interests are best served by maintaining current leadership during this crisis. So there it was. Not concern for Victoria's safety, but an opportunity to challenge her position. Mason's hands clenched at his sides. My security protocols are being enhanced. The individual responsible is in custody. Law enforcement is tracking the conspiracy's origins, and the false financial allegations have been thoroughly debunked by our auditors. What exactly is your concern, Robert? My concern is that someone wanted you dead badly enough to plant an operative in this building for 8 months. That suggests enemies powerful enough to threaten this company's stability. Perhaps it's time to consider whether your leadership style has created untenable risks. My leadership style doubled our value in 2 years. What you're actually suggesting is that I made you all significantly wealthier, and now you're wondering if someone more pliable might be easier to control. That's not what I'm saying. It's exactly what you're saying. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes locked on Robert. You've opposed every major decision I've made. The TechCore acquisition you said would bankrupt us generated $30 million in revenue last quarter. The restructuring you called reckless improved operational efficiency by 18%. You don't question my competence, Robert. You question my right to have it." The room fell silent. Other board members shifted uncomfortably, some nodding slightly, others maintaining careful neutrality. "I move that we table this discussion." Helen Crawford, one of the older board members, spoke up. "Victoria has handled this crisis with exactly the leadership we hired her to provide. The threats against her are proof of her effectiveness, not evidence of failure." "Seconded," added David Richardson, a venture capitalist who'd backed Victoria's early initiatives. Robert's jaw tightened. "Fine, but I want regular updates on the investigation, and I want enhanced security measures that don't rely on—" His eyes flicked dismissively toward Mason. "Maintenance staff playing hero." "Noted." Victoria's voice was cold enough to frost glass. "Anything else?" The meeting continued for another hour, reviewing financial projections and operational updates, but the tension never fully dissipated. Mason watched Robert throughout, noting how the older man's eyes kept returning to Victoria with something that went beyond professional rivalry. This was personal and dangerous. When they finally escaped back to the executive floor, Victoria's composure cracked the moment her office door closed. She leaned against her desk, exhaling slowly, the weight of maintaining perfection visibly crushing down on her shoulders. "He's going to keep pushing. Every crisis, every setback, he'll use it to question my leadership." "Then don't give him setbacks. Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Succeed so loudly he can't make himself heard." Mason crossed the office slowly, aware he was entering territory they'd both avoided. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Make it sound possible. Make me believe I can actually survive this." "Because I've watched you for weeks now. I've seen how hard you work, how much you care about getting things right. You're not just competent, Victoria. You're extraordinary. And anyone who can't see that is deliberately closing their eyes." "Mason," her voice caught on his name. "Someone tried to kill you yesterday. And today you stood in front of cameras and the board and everyone watching for you to break. And you didn't. You're still standing, still fighting. That's not something that needs my belief to make it real. It already is." Victoria stood there 3 feet away from him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with the space between them that kept shrinking. "You scare me." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I scare you?" "You see me. Not the CEO, not the Ice Queen, not the legacy or the empire, just me. And I don't know what to do with that." Mason's heart hammered against his ribs. "You don't have to do anything with it. I'm not asking for anything, Victoria. I'm here. That's all." "That's not all. That's everything." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither of them could afford to pursue. Mason knew they were standing on the edge of something that would change everything, destroy every professional boundary, compromise every carefully maintained distance. But before either of them could move forward or back, the door burst open and Margaret rushed in, her face pale. "We have a problem." The investigators found something in Grant's phone records. The person who hired him? It's someone inside the company. The words hit like a physical blow. Victoria's face went white, then flushed with rage, so pure it seemed to heat the air around her. "Who?" Margaret hesitated, her eyes flicking to Mason before settling back on Victoria. "The investigators want to brief you directly. They're on their way up now with Detective Sanders from the police department. But Victoria, they said the evidence is conclusive. It goes high. Someone with access to executive systems and confidential information." "I don't care about conclusive. I want a name." "They wouldn't give it to me over the phone. Said it was too sensitive." Margaret's hands twisted together, a rare show of anxiety. "But they mentioned it goes high. Someone with access to executive systems and confidential information." Mason felt ice spread through his chest. High level meant board members, senior executives, people who'd been with the company for years. People Victoria had trusted, worked alongside, perhaps even considered allies in the constant battle to prove herself worthy of her father's legacy. "Clear my schedule for the next 2 hours. I want Daniel, the investigators, and Detective Sanders in the main conference room. No one else. And Margaret, I need you to pull personnel files for everyone at director level and above. Access logs for the last year, financial records, anything that might show connections to Grant or unusual activity." "On it." Margaret disappeared, her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. Victoria stood motionless for a moment, her back to Mason, her shoulders rigid with tension. When she finally turned, her expression was pure steel. All traces of the vulnerability from moments before locked away behind walls he suspected were even thicker now. "This doesn't leave this room. Not even to security staff you might trust. Until we know who we're dealing with, everyone is suspect." "Understood. But Victoria, you need to consider that whoever this is, they're desperate enough to kill you. If they suspect they've been discovered, they'll do what? Try again? Let them try. I'm not hiding and I'm not running. Not from corporate sabotage and certainly not from traitors in my own company. I'm not suggesting you hide. I'm suggesting you be smart about this." Mason moved closer, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "Someone inside had access to your schedule, knew exactly where you'd be standing on that stage, had months to plan this. They're not going to confess and walk away quietly. Which is why we're going to be very careful about how we handle the reveal." Victoria's eyes held his, and he saw the strategist beneath the rage. "Once we have the name, we control the information. Use it to set a trap. Gather evidence that's airtight. Make sure when we move against them, there's no possibility of escape or legal maneuvering. You've done this before. Not murder conspiracies, but corporate warfare." "Yes." Victoria moved to the window, looking out over the city she'd claimed as her territory. "You don't get to where I am without learning how to identify enemies and neutralize them. I just never expected the enemy to be this close." The pain in her voice was carefully controlled but audible. Mason understood then that this betrayal cut deeper than professional rivalry or business competition. Victoria had built her life around not trusting people, and now someone had proven every cynical instinct right. Not everyone is your enemy. She looked at him, something flickering in her eyes. "No? I'm not." The words hung between them, simple and absolute. Victoria studied his face like she was searching for cracks in the foundation, testing the weight his promise could bear. "I know." She said it so softly he almost missed it. The intercom on her desk buzzed. "Miss Sterling, Detective Sanders and the investigative team are here. Send them to conference room A. We'll be there in 2 minutes." Victoria straightened her suit jacket, smoothed her hair, rebuilt her armor piece by piece until the vulnerable woman who'd confessed that Mason saw her was completely hidden. But just before she headed for the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Stay close. I need—" She stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. "I need to know you're there." "I'm not going anywhere." Conference Room A was the largest on the executive floor, designed for board meetings and high-stakes negotiations. Detective Sanders was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many crimes to be shocked by much. She stood beside Daniel and two other investigators Mason didn't recognize, all of them looking grim. Miss Sterling, thank you for meeting on short notice. I understand this is difficult, but the evidence we've uncovered requires immediate action. Show me. Sanders pulled up images on the main screen, phone records, financial transactions, email metadata. Michael Grant received his instructions through an encrypted messaging app, but we were able to trace the account through payment records. The person who hired him made 3 transfers totaling $50,000 over the past 6 months. The money came from an offshore account, but the setup was sloppy. They thought they'd hidden their tracks, but forensic accounting found the source. Who? Victoria's voice was flat, controlled, betraying nothing. Sanders glanced at Daniel, then back to Victoria. The account was funded by liquidating stock options belonging to Stephen Pierce, your chief technology officer. The name landed like a grenade. Mason saw Victoria's expression freeze, shock warring with disbelief. Stephen Pierce had been with Sterling Enterprises for 10 years, had worked directly with Charles Sterling, was responsible for the technological innovations that had made the company's recent expansion possible. That's not possible. He's been loyal to this company since before I took over. He supported every initiative, worked 18-hour days on the new product line. Why would he? We believe he's working with outside interests, Sanders interrupted gently. The financial trail shows he's in debt. Significant gambling losses over the past 2 years, roughly $180,000. Victoria sat back, her face pale. Stephen came to my father's funeral, told me he believed in my vision for the company, has sat in meetings with me almost daily for 2 years. And all that time, he was planning to kill me? We've been watching him since we identified the connection an hour ago. He's in his office right now, acting like everything is normal. We need your authorization to arrest him. Not yet. Sanders frowned. Miss Sterling, he's a flight risk. If he suspects we're onto him, he doesn't suspect. If he did, he'd already be gone. Victoria's mind was clearly racing, strategizing even through the shock. Stephen is smart, careful. He's been planning this for months, maybe years, which means there's more people involved, more evidence to gather. If we arrest him now, we lose the chance to see the full picture. You want to use him? Sanders' tone carried understanding. I want to finish this. Not just stop one attack, but dismantle the entire conspiracy. Stephen had help. Someone on the outside, funding this, coordinating it. I want them too. Daniel leaned forward. That's dangerous, Miss Sterling. Every day Stephen walks free is another day he could try something else. Not if he thinks he's still hidden. Not if we feed him information that makes him believe his plan is still viable. Mason watched her work, saw the strategic mind that had built an empire operating at full capacity. But he also saw the cost, the way her hands trembled slightly before she clasped them together, the tension in her jaw that spoke of betrayal cutting deep. What do you propose? We tell Stephen that the investigation into Grant is stalling, that the money trail went cold at the offshore account, that I'm focused on external threats and increasing public security, leaving internal systems vulnerable. We give him rope to hang himself with, and we watch everything he does, everyone he contacts. That puts you at significant risk. If he feels threatened, if he suspects at all, I'll have protection. Victoria's eyes flicked to Mason. And I'll be careful. But I won't let whoever orchestrated this walk away because we moved too fast. The detective studied Victoria for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 48 hours. We'll monitor Stephen around the clock, track every communication, every movement. But if he makes any move that suggests immediate danger, we shut it down. Agreed. The next 2 days were the longest of Mason's life. He stayed within 10 feet of Victoria at all times, shadowing her through meetings and video conferences, standing outside her office when she needed privacy, eating meals he barely tasted while watching everyone who came near her with suspicion that bordered on paranoia. Stephen Pierce appeared at staff meetings looking concerned and supportive, asking Victoria how she was handling the stress, offering to take on additional responsibilities. Mason watched him perform empathy and concern, and every word felt like acid burning through his resolve not to grab the man by his expensive collar and throw him against the nearest wall. "How are you holding up?" Stephen asked Victoria after a product development meeting, his voice warm with false concern. "I'm fine, Stephen. Thank you for asking. Your work on the new interface is excellent, by the way. Exactly what we need for launch." "Just doing my job. We all want to see you succeed." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that Mason had to fight the urge to intervene. But Victoria's hand touched his arm briefly as she passed, a silent reminder to stay calm, stay focused. Surveillance teams reported that Stephen was making encrypted calls to an unknown number, always from locations outside the building where he thought he had privacy. The technical team was working to break the encryption, but it was sophisticated, suggesting whoever Stephen reported to had significant resources. On the second night, around 11, Mason was doing a final security sweep of the executive floor when his earpiece crackled to life. "We've got movement. Stephen just entered the building through the parking garage. He's not supposed to be here." Daniel's voice was urgent. "Where's Miss Sterling?" "Still in her office. We've got eyes on her, but Stephen's heading for the executive floor now. Get to her." Mason ran, his boots pounding against marble as he raced down the corridor. Behind him, he heard elevator doors opening, footsteps echoing through the empty building. He burst into Victoria's wing to find her at her desk, paperwork spread around her, completely unaware of the danger approaching. "We need to go. Now." Victoria looked up, instantly reading the tension in his voice. "Stephen?" "In the building. Coming up." Daniel's mobilizing security, but the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the executive floor, emergency lighting failing to activate. Mason heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath, heard movement in the hallway outside, and every instinct screamed danger. "Stay behind me." He pulled Victoria away from the desk, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. He could see the outline of her office door, the windows showing city lights beyond. "He's cutting power, disabling security systems." "Where's your panic button?" "Desk drawer. But if the power's out..." Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Someone who knew exactly where they were going. "Victoria!" Stephen's voice called from the darkness, friendly and calm. "Are you still here? The power went out. I came to make sure you were okay." The performance was chilling in its normalcy. Mason felt Victoria tense against his back, heard her breathing quicken. "I'm fine, Stephen. Just finishing some work. The emergency lighting should kick in any moment." "Actually, it won't." Stephen appeared in the doorway, backlit by emergency exits in the hallway beyond. Mason couldn't see his face clearly, but he could see the gun in Stephen's hand, dark and deadly against the faint light. "I made sure of that. Had months to prepare, to understand every system in this building. You made it easy, really, trusting me with so much access." "Stephen, what are you doing?" Victoria's voice carried just the right note of confusion, still playing her part even with a gun pointed at her. What I should have done 2 years ago when they first approached me. You were never supposed to run this company, Victoria. Your father knew it. The board knew it. Everyone knew except you. So stubborn, so convinced you could prove everyone wrong. And you did, which made everything so much more complicated. Who approached you? Victoria asked, and Mason heard the calculation in her voice. Keep him talking, buy time for security to arrive. People who understand that innovation shouldn't be controlled by legacy and name recognition. People who could actually use Sterling Enterprises technology to change the world instead of protecting market share and shareholder profits. Stephen moved closer, and Mason shifted to maintain his position between them. They offered me a real future. Chief Technology Officer of a combined entity that would dominate the industry. All I had to do was remove the obstacle. You mean kill me? Remove. The stage light was supposed to be clean. Tragic accident, company in mourning, smooth transition to new leadership. But you had to have him. The gun gestured toward Mason, playing maintenance hero. Ruined everything. So now we do this the hard way. Security is already coming. Building's on lockdown. You won't make it out. I don't need to make it out. I just need her dead. They'll extract me after. New identity, new life. But only if I finish the job. The gun rose, pointing directly at Victoria, and Mason saw Stephen's finger tighten on the trigger. He didn't think, didn't calculate odds or consider consequences. He lunged sideways, slamming into Stephen with all his weight, driving them both into the wall beside the door. The gun discharged, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, the muzzle flash illuminating the office in stark white light. Mason felt the bullet pass so close to his head, the air pressure made his ear ring. But he was already moving, grabbing for Stephen's wrist, trying to control the weapon. They crashed into furniture, struggling in near darkness, and Mason realized with cold clarity that Stephen was stronger than he looked, desperate enough to fight with everything he had. "Run!" Mason shouted at Victoria, not sure if she could hear him over the sound of his own pulse hammering. "Get out!" But Victoria didn't run. He caught a glimpse of her moving in his peripheral vision, heard the crash of something heavy, her desk lamp connecting with Stephen's skull. The CTO staggered, his grip on the gun loosening, and Mason wrenched it away, sending it skittering across the floor into darkness. Stephen recovered faster than Mason expected, driving an elbow into his ribs that forced the air from his lungs. They went down together, hitting the floor hard, and Mason felt hands close around his throat, squeezing with methodical pressure. Should have stayed invisible. Should have just fixed the lights and disappeared. But you had to play hero. Had to make yourself important to her. Now you die with her. Mason's vision started to gray at the edges, his lungs screaming for air. He clawed at Stephen's hands, trying to break the grip, but his strength was fading fast. Through the gathering darkness, he saw Victoria searching frantically for something, anything she could use as a weapon. Then light flooded the office, blinding after so much darkness, and voices shouted from multiple directions. The pressure on Mason's throat released abruptly as security guards swarmed the room, pulling Stephen away, forcing him to the ground. Mason gasped for air, his throat raw, his vision clearing slowly. Strong hands helped him sit up, and suddenly Victoria was there, kneeling beside him, her hands framing his face with desperate gentleness. "Mason? Can you hear me? Are you hurt?" He tried to speak, coughed instead, his throat burning. Victoria's eyes were wide with fear he'd never seen there before, tears tracking down her cheeks, and he realized she was shaking. I'm okay. Are you? Did he? I'm fine. You kept yourself between us. You threw yourself at a gun. You impossible, brave, stupid man. You could have died. Couldn't let him hurt you. Around them, security was securing Stephen, reading him his rights, coordinating with the police teams flooding into the building. Detective Sanders appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. We got it all on audio. His confession, the mention of extraction and new identity. That plus the attempted murder will put him away for life. And we're already working on identifying his contacts based on the phone records we cracked an hour ago. Good. Get him out of here. Get all of them out. Daniel started to protest. Miss Sterling, we need statements, medical evaluation. Later. Everyone out. Now. They went, though Daniel looked reluctant. Stephen was dragged away, shouting threats and justifications that faded as they hauled him toward the elevators. Then the door closed, and Mason and Victoria were alone in her office, surrounded by overturned furniture and the evidence of violence, both of them breathing hard. You saved my life. Again. Victoria's voice was quiet, wonder mixed with something deeper. That's becoming a habit. Mason tried to joke, but his voice was too rough, too raw. Don't make light of this. You threw yourself in front of a bullet for me. You could have died. But I didn't. We didn't. We're both still here. Because of you. The words came out fierce, almost angry. Because you keep choosing to stand between me and people trying to destroy me. And I don't know what to do with that. She stopped, her voice breaking completely, and Mason saw the moment when every wall she'd built came crashing down. The Ice Queen dissolved, leaving only Victoria, terrified, grateful, completely undone by the weight of everything they'd survived together. I see you too. I see you, Mason Brooks. And I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between you walking in on me half-dressed and you tackling a man with a gun, I stopped being able to imagine facing any of this without you. Mason's breath caught. They were still on the floor of her office, both of them bruised and bleeding, surrounded by chaos. And she was looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tried to kill her twice. I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever, if you'll let me stay. I don't deserve you. That's not your choice to make. I'm already here, already yours if you want me. The silence that followed felt endless, heavy with possibility and fear, and the bridge they were both standing on, deciding whether to cross or retreat to safer ground. Then Victoria leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't gentle or uncertain. It was desperate and fierce, tasting of salt from her tears and copper from his split lip. And Mason kissed her back with everything he had, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer, and she came willingly, pressing against him like she needed the contact to believe he was real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria rested her forehead against his. This is complicated. I know. People will talk. The board, the employees, everyone will have opinions about the CEO and the maintenance tech. I know that too. And I'm still figuring out how to be human instead of just a position and a legacy. I've got time. As much as you need. Victoria pulled back just enough to look at him, searching his face for doubt or hesitation. Whatever she saw there made her eyes fill with tears again, but this time she was smiling. You really mean that? Every word. You and me against corporate assassins? We make a pretty good team." Victoria laughed, the sound watery but genuine, and kissed him again, softer this time, slower, like they had all the time in the world instead of security teams waiting outside and statements to give and an empire that still needed protecting. But for this moment, in the darkness of her office, with emergency lights finally flickering to life, they were just two people who'd survived impossible odds and found something neither of them had been looking for: each other. The days that followed were a whirlwind of investigations, press conferences, and damage control. Stephen Pierce was formally charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and corporate espionage. The investigation into his outside contacts led to arrests at 2 competing tech firms and exposed a coordinated effort to destabilize Sterling Enterprises that had been years in the making. Victoria faced it all with the same steel composure that had built her reputation. But now Mason saw what lay beneath: the exhaustion, the fear, the human vulnerability she'd spent so long hiding. And every night, when the executive floor emptied and the city lights glittered beyond her windows, she let that mask fall away completely. "The board wants to give you a commendation," Victoria said one evening, a week after Stephen's arrest. They were in her office, ostensibly reviewing security protocols, actually just sitting together in the quiet after another brutal day. "For saving my life. Twice." "I don't need a commendation." "What do you need?" Mason looked at her, this extraordinary woman who'd somehow chosen to trust him with her secrets and her safety, and knew the answer with absolute certainty. "Just this. You. Us. However that looks." Victoria was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on his arm where the cut from the stage light had healed to a thin scar. "I told Margaret today. About us. She wasn't surprised, which means everyone probably already knows." "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified, relieved, like I'm standing on the edge of something I can't control, and for once in my life, I don't want to." She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength mixed in equal measure. "The board will object. Some of them anyway. Robert will absolutely use this to question my judgment. There will be policies to navigate, HR concerns, public perception to manage." "I can handle it, if you can." "That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about what I'm asking you to give up." "Your privacy, your anonymity. The moment this becomes public knowledge, you're not just Mason Brooks, maintenance tech and single father. You're the CEO's boyfriend. Everything you do, every choice you make, will be scrutinized." Mason had thought about this, late at night when he couldn't sleep, imagining the photographers and the gossip and the inevitable headlines about the working-class hero who'd caught the Ice Queen's heart. "Emma already knows something's different. She asked me yesterday why I smile at my phone so much. I told her I met someone special." "What did she say?" "She asked if the special person makes me happy. I said yes. She said that's all that matters." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She sounds wise beyond her years. She's had to be. Growing up with just me, watching me struggle to keep us afloat, it made her grow up fast. But now, with the new job, the stability, she gets to be a kid again. And that's because of you. "No, that's because of you. I just gave you an opportunity you'd already earned." Victoria took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I want to meet her. Emma. If you're comfortable with that. If it's not too soon." The request settled into Mason's chest like warmth spreading through cold spaces. She'd like that. Fair warning, though. She'll ask you a million questions and probably show you every drawing she's ever made. "I'm looking forward to it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the city sprawling below them, the empire Victoria had built, humming with life even in the evening hours. Mason thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that horrifying moment with the frosted glass door to this quiet intimacy that felt more precious than anything he'd ever known. "What are you thinking?" Victoria asked softly. "That 3 months ago, I was drowning, barely keeping my head above water, terrified I'd fail Emma, convinced I'd never be more than invisible. And now I'm sitting in the CEO's office, holding her hand, planning for her to meet my daughter. It doesn't feel real." "It's real." Victoria squeezed his hand. "You saved my life, Mason. Twice. You saw past every wall I'd built and refused to look away even when I tried to push you back. You made me believe I could be human and powerful at the same time. That's as real as it gets." "I love you." The words fell out before Mason could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying in their vulnerability. Victoria's breath caught, her eyes going wide. "You don't have to say it back. I needed you to know. Whatever happens next, with the board or the press or anything else, I need you to know that this isn't about the job or the money or proximity to power. It's about you. Just you." Victoria was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too, radiant and unguarded in a way he'd never seen. "I love you too. God help me, I love you too." And it terrifies me because I don't know how to protect something this fragile and precious. I don't know how to be vulnerable without feeling like I'm inviting disaster. You don't have to protect it alone. That's what I'm here for. We protect each other. That's not how it's supposed to work. I'm supposed to be the one with all the power, all the control. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. We're partners, equal, even if the world doesn't see it that way. You have your strengths, I have mine. Together, we're stronger than apart. Victoria pulled him closer, kissing him with a tenderness that made his chest ache. "How did I get so lucky?" "Pretty sure I'm the lucky one. You changed my entire life." "You saved mine. Literally. I'd say that makes us even." They stayed there until the city lights blurred together and exhaustion finally caught up with both of them. Margaret had long since gone home. The security teams were on night rotation, and the executive floor belonged only to them. "Come home with me," Mason said, the invitation carrying weight beyond the words. "Not tonight. I need to prepare Emma first. But soon. I want you to see where we live, meet Dorothy, be part of our real life, not just this." He gestured to the office, the empire, the world of marble and mahogany that felt increasingly like a beautiful cage. "I'd like that. And maybe you can come to my place too? It's too big for one person, too empty. I'd like to fill it with something other than work." "Deal." 2 weeks later, Mason stood in his small apartment, watching Victoria Sterling meet his daughter for the first time. He'd been nervous all day, worried about the collision of his two worlds. But Emma had made it easy. She'd opened the door, looked up at Victoria with serious eyes, and announced, "You're really pretty." "David said you were pretty, but I thought maybe he was just being mushy." Victoria had laughed, genuine and delighted, and dropped to Emma's level. "Your dad tells me you're an artist. I'd love to see some of your work." And just like that, they were okay. Emma dragged Victoria to her room, showed her every drawing and painting, explained in exhaustive detail her plans to be a veterinarian who also painted animal portraits. Victoria listened with complete attention, asked thoughtful questions, praised Emma's talent with sincerity that made Mason's daughter glow. Dorothy stopped by with cookies, gave Victoria a thorough once-over, and declared, "Well, she's got good sense in her eyes. Don't mess him up, young lady. He's one of the good ones." "I know," Victoria had replied seriously. "I'm very aware of how lucky I am." They ordered pizza, ate on the floor of Mason's tiny living room because the table only seated two, and Victoria fit into their life like she'd always belonged there. Emma fell asleep, curled against Victoria's side during a movie, and Mason found them both on the couch later, Victoria's arms wrapped protectively around his daughter, both of them peaceful in a way that made his throat tight. "Thank you," Victoria whispered when he gently woke her, "for letting me be part of this, for trusting me with her." "Thank you for being exactly who you are. Not the CEO, not the Ice Queen. Just Victoria. That's who she needs to know. That's who I love." The next morning, they went public, not with press releases or official announcements, but simply by being seen together. Victoria arrived at Sterling Tower with Mason and Emma, held his hand in the lobby, introduced Emma to Margaret with pride that made it clear this wasn't casual. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some employees smiled, clearly charmed by the humanizing glimpse of their CEO. Others whispered, speculation running wild about the maintenance tech who'd caught Victoria Sterling's attention. The business press had a field day, running stories about the unlikely romance between the billionaire heiress and the working-class single father. Robert Caldwell called an emergency board meeting to discuss concerning personal entanglements that could impact leadership credibility. Victoria shut him down with cold precision, pointing out that her personal life was exactly that, personal, and that her relationship with Mason had zero impact on her ability to run the company. When Robert pushed, suggesting the optics were problematic, Helen Crawford interrupted to note that Victoria's approval ratings had actually improved since news of the relationship broke. "Turns out people like seeing you happy," Helen said with a slight smile. "They like the story of the hero maintenance worker and the CEO. It makes you relatable instead of intimidating." "I'm not running a popularity contest," Victoria replied. "I'm running a company, and I'll continue to do that with the same excellence I've always maintained, regardless of who I'm dating." The board voted to table the discussion indefinitely. Robert left the meeting looking furious, but his influence was waning. Victoria's leadership had proven itself too valuable to challenge over personal matters. 3 months later, Mason sat in his new office, still on the executive floor, but expanded now to accommodate his elevated role as Director of Facilities and Security Integration, and marveled at how much had changed. He had been formally promoted, not because of his relationship with Victoria, but because he'd proven his value in ways that transcended their personal connection. His insights into building security had led to comprehensive system upgrades across all Sterling Enterprises properties. His ability to identify potential threats before they materialized had become invaluable. Emma was thriving. The better salary meant better schools, art classes she'd always wanted, the braces she needed. More importantly, it meant time. Mason could pick her up from school most days, help with homework, be present in ways he'd never imagined possible when he was drowning in the basement fixing other people's emergencies. And Victoria was learning to be human alongside being powerful. She came to Emma's art shows, joined them for Pizza Fridays, spent Sunday mornings in Mason's apartment reading the paper while Emma drew and Mason made pancakes. She still commanded boardrooms and dismantled competitors, still built an empire with strategic brilliance, but now she also laughed more easily, trusted more freely, allowed herself to need someone without seeing it as weakness. "Dad?" Emma appeared in his office doorway, visiting after school as she sometimes did. "Can Victoria come to my school play next week? I'm a tree in the forest scene." "I'm sure she'd love to, but you can ask her yourself. She'll be here in a few minutes for our security review meeting." "Cool. Hey, Dad?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" "I'm glad you met Victoria. You smile a lot more now. And she looks at you like you're the most important person in the world." Mason's throat tightened. "She looks at you that way too, you know. She loves you almost as much as I do." "That's a lot." Emma grinned. "That's basically infinity." Victoria arrived moments later, immaculate in a gray suit, but with a softness in her eyes when she saw Emma that transformed her entire face. "I heard there's a very important tree performing next week. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Emma beamed and launched into an explanation of her role, her costume, the entire plot of the play. Victoria listened with complete attention, asking questions, making suggestions, being present in a way that still amazed Mason every time he witnessed it. Later, after Emma had gone home with Dorothy and the security review was complete, Victoria and Mason stood at the windows of her office, watching the sun set over Boston. "Robert resigned from the board today," Victoria said quietly. "He couldn't accept that I refused to choose between my personal life and my professional credibility. Said I'd damaged the company's reputation." "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved. He was a liability, always looking for ways to undermine me. Now Helen will take his seat, and she actually supports innovative leadership." Victoria leaned against Mason, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Our stock is up 12% this quarter. The new product line exceeded projections by 30%. Employee satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in company history. I think the reputation is doing just fine." "You did that, not me." "We did that. I made good decisions. You kept me safe enough to implement them. That's partnership." Mason kissed the top of her head, breathing in her perfume, still amazed that this was his life now. "I love you." "I love you too. And I'm terrified I'll wake up and discover this was all a dream. That I am still the ice queen working 18-hour days with no one to come home to. No small girl who draws me pictures of veterinary clinics. No man who sees past every defense I've ever built. Not a dream. This is real. We're real. Promise me something." Victoria turned in his arms, looking up at him with vulnerability she'd learned to share freely. "Promise me that if this gets too hard, the scrutiny, the pressure, the constant speculation, you'll tell me. I can handle losing board members and business rivals. I can't handle losing you." "You're not going to lose me. I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, Victoria Sterling. Me and Emma and Pizza Fridays and all the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of actual life." "That sounds perfect." "It is. We are." Victoria kissed him as the last light faded from the sky and the city below came alive with evening lights. Somewhere in this building, maintenance workers were fixing broken things, invisible to the people who depended on their work. Mason had been one of them once, drowning in exhaustion and fear, convinced he'd never be more than the sum of his failures. Now he stood in the CEO's office, holding the woman he loved, planning for a future that included art shows and board meetings and Pizza Fridays and everything in between. He'd saved her life, and she'd saved his right back, not from physical danger, but from the quiet desperation of believing he'd never deserve more than survival. They'd found each other in the chaos, a frosted glass door opening at exactly the wrong moment, or maybe exactly the right one. Two people drowning in different ways, learning to breathe together, building something stronger than either of them could have created alone. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The wedding was small, intimate, nothing like what people expected from Victoria Sterling. No society guests or business connections, no elaborate ceremony designed to impress. Just family and friends who actually mattered, gathered in a garden overlooking the harbor on a perfect September afternoon. Emma was the flower girl, taking her role with utmost seriousness, scattering petals with precision, while Dorothy dabbed at tears in the front row. Margaret served as Victoria's maid of honor, having evolved from executive assistant to genuine friend over the months of watching her boss learn to be happy. Mason stood at the altar, watching Victoria walk toward him, and his breath caught the same way it had that first morning when he'd walked through a frosted glass door and changed both their lives forever. She was beautiful. Not the weaponized beauty of the CEO, but something softer, more real. The smile on her face was genuine, unguarded, meant only for him. "You look terrified," she whispered when she reached him. "Terrified of messing this up, of saying the wrong thing, of somehow proving I don't deserve this." Mason Brooks, you saved my life. Twice. You taught me that being human and being powerful aren't mutually exclusive. You gave me your daughter's trust and your own heart without expecting anything in return. If anyone doesn't deserve this perfection, it's me. Then I guess we're both incredibly lucky we found each other. Incredibly lucky, Victoria agreed, taking his hands. They spoke vows they'd written themselves, promises about partnership and protection, about seeing each other truly, about building a life where both of them could be whole. Emma brought forward the rings, beaming with pride at her crucial role. When they were finally pronounced married, Victoria kissed Mason like he was her entire world, and he kissed her back the same way, and Emma cheered louder than anyone. The reception was held at Victoria's house, their house now, though Mason still sometimes couldn't believe it. A beautiful, historic property that Victoria had slowly filled with life over the past year. Emma's artwork on the walls, Mason's tools in the garage, evidence of actual living instead of just existing. "Speech!" someone called out, and Mason found himself standing, looking out at the small gathering of people who'd supported them through everything. "I'm not good at speeches," he admitted. "I'm better at fixing things. But I've learned over the past year that some things aren't broken. They're just waiting for the right person to see them clearly." His eyes found Victoria's. "I was drowning when we met, convinced I'd failed at everything that mattered, that I'd never be more than invisible. And then this extraordinary woman looked at me and saw something I couldn't see in myself. She gave me a chance, trusted me with her safety, her secrets, her heart. She let me be part of something bigger than survival." Mason's voice caught. "Victoria, you saved me. Not from assassins or corporate conspiracies, but from believing I didn't deserve more than exhaustion and fear. You taught me that love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, honesty, the courage to be seen. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for becoming my family." He raised his glass. "To my wife, my partner, the woman who faced down death threats and boardroom battles and still somehow found room in her life for a working-class single dad and his 6-year-old daughter. I love you more than words can express." "To Victoria!" the guests echoed. Victoria stood, tears streaming down her face, and crossed to him. She didn't give a speech, just kissed him in front of everyone, holding his face in her hands like he was precious beyond measure. Later, when the guests had departed and Emma was asleep in her room, Mason and Victoria stood on the terrace overlooking the harbor. The city lights reflected on the water, beautiful and infinite, full of possibility. Happy? Mason asked, pulling her close. Happier than I knew was possible. A year ago, I was alone, convinced that love was a liability I couldn't afford. Now I have a husband who sees me, a daughter who draws me pictures, a life that's messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. We did good, didn't we? You and me against corporate assassins. We did better than good. We built something real. Victoria turned in his arms, her eyes reflecting starlight. I love you, Mason Brooks. I love you, Victoria Brooks. The name still felt new, strange, and wonderful on his tongue. Victoria had chosen to take his name, not for tradition, but because she wanted the connection, wanted to belong to something beyond corporate legacy and family empire. Ready for the rest of our lives? She asked. With you? Always. They stood together in the darkness, two people who'd found each other through chaos and built something unshakable from the wreckage. The maintenance worker and the CEO, the single father and the ice queen, the invisible man and the woman who'd learned to see. They'd saved each other, and in doing so, they'd both finally found home.